Hi everyone and welcome to Video Journalism, Media Law. So just an introduction to media law. I've got a little link there where you can be trialled by media. And one of the main things about this lecture is all the things you need to consider when you're actually filming and interviewing people and putting stories together so you're not breaking the law basically. Broadly, there are three main pieces of legislation which act to regulate media ownership: the Broadcasting Services Act, the Trade Practices Act, and the Foreign Acquisition and Takeovers Act. So all these acts, you need to know a little bit about them at least before you get into it. So the main bodies involved in the regulation of the media ownership are the Australian Communication and Media Authority, the ACMA, which administers broadcasting services and is responsible for regulating of broadcasting, and the Australian Consumer and Competition Commission. Okay, that's responsible for promoting competition and fair trade in the marketplace, and the Foreign Investment Review Board, which examines proposals by foreign interest for investment in Australia and makes recommendations to the government on those types of proposals. So the law in media, there's three things we're going to be looking at: freedom of expression, rights, and balance. And I'm going to talk about these quickly, and then I'm going to go back and show you all the tutorial videos that we have which cover all these sort of things, and maybe watching that first will help you before you continue with this lecture, so that you know exactly what's going on. So there are four main areas of media law. There's privacy, there's contempt, defamation, and copyright. And I've got a little guide there for you for media law in Australia, so if you want to grab that link and jump online and have a quick look. Okay, there's some links as well. Now, I think the Princess Di one, as I've lost the link there to the Law Society in Leeds in the UK, but the rest of the world is a little bit about privacy. But before we go there, I'm going to just take you back to our course content. I'm sorry, let's go there. And let's have a look around here. So, True Stories Video Journalism, if we go into our unit content again, let's look at our study guides. So please look through these, because this is where the main information happens for you. So I can only give you an outline through the lectures, but for you to get some practical applications, you need to go through this. So Ethics and Media Law for Video Journalists gives you an overview, the basic principles of media law, and explores issues in relation to the video and television journalism reporting. Particular attention is given to the reporting on violent and traumatic events, suicide and mental illness, and advice on self-care for journalists reporting on traumatic events. So the objectives are here for you, but if we click on here, there's lots of good stuff for you to go through, okay? So please do the reading, Legal and Ethical Issues by Barbara Allison. As I've mentioned before, it's in the readings for you. So if you click through there, My Readings, you can access that reading 36. And there's another reading there that you can access through that link there. Now, these are great video tutorials for you. Mark Willesee on the ethics of reporting on disasters, as we've mentioned before. So it's only 2 minutes, so please watch that. Also, ethical reporting on people affected by trauma. Okay, so please watch that as well. And Mark Willesee again on the logistics of reporting on disasters. So that's 4 minutes. So you've got some, I don't want to play them now and take up the time in the lecture time for you. I want you to watch those in your own time. And there's one more reading as well, reporting suicide and mental illness as well, okay? So with all that, you should have the good base on how to report on traumatic events and all the legal and ethical issues related to all that sort of stuff, okay? Because you can get into trouble and you can be extremely insensitive to people as well on how you report them, okay? So let's go back to the slides. So let's talk about privacy. There's three key moments or three big events that have shown how a breach of privacy can change the way news is presented, and in some cases like a whole news organisation had to shut down, like News of the World. Now I've got the links for you, and you can click on them and get sent straight to them and find out about it. Now I think this is a really good thing to find out a little bit about the News of the World story, where they hacked phones and recorded conversations and a whole organisation had to shut down after hundreds of years of reporting. And it goes into detail about what happened and how many people were involved, and even voicemails left on young girls that were murdered. So it was. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I think you should read this, because it's a really, really interesting story of how privacy laws changed due to a terrible thing like phones being hacked by an organisation just trying to get stories. The other one is Princess Di. You probably know more about Princess Di because she's such a public figure. Again, I've got the link there. How Diana's death changed the British media, and which is really interesting again. So for the people who don't know much about Princess Di, she basically passed away in a car accident being chased by paparazzi. So again, I won't go into it because it's just going to take a lot of time going through it for me, but it's something that you should be looking into anyway. And Facebook. How Facebook breaches privacy, and I think we're in a new generation where we don't have a lot of privacy left, so you really need to be really careful how you go about sharing information online, and how organisations like Facebook and other social media platforms work their way around privacy laws to grab your information and contact things. And what is privacy? It's the right of the individual to be protected against intrusion into her personal or his personal life and affairs or family by direct physical means or by publication of information. So you sort of, for anything to happen, you sort of need to be defamed in some way for anything to happen. So these are all avenues of intrusion on privacy: unwanted publicity, the misuse of your own information, for instance, by banks, employers, educational institutions, and, as I just mentioned before, things like Facebook as well. Intrusions on your home life, Princess Di. Intrusions in your business life. Intrusions in the course of administration of law. And the misuse of info held by public authorities. So, for instance, if you have any of your information stored up at, say, Medicare, and they somehow release their information to private people to contact you, that's intrusion of privacy. So we have arguments against privacy legislation. The idea that the media is self-regulating. The other thing about investigative journalism could be damaged because there's breaches of privacy. For instance, recently what happened with One Nation and the Al Jazeera reporter recording them privately, and then a big news report coming back about One Nation trying to get funding from the gun lobby in America. There's always a problem with providing a precise definition, and there's not enough public support for the introduction of such a law as well. So self-regulation is the Press Council, and I've got a link there for you as well, so you can grab that. But you can also be in contempt of court as well. And there's different types of contempt of court. So there's contempt in the face of the court, disobedience, scandalising the court, and this thing called sub judice or contempt, which we'll talk about in a second. So examples is Darren Hinch and Channel 7's Today's Night, which means that you may record something which is in contempt of the court, which is against the court's instructions. So for instance, Darren Hinch, I'll see if that link still works. Let me have a look. Okay, so Darren Hinch actually went to jail because he released the name of a pedophile, which seems normal for you and I, which basically you think, well, he's a pedophile, he should be named, but the court said he shouldn't be named, and Darren Hinch named him, and that's why he had to go to court. So that, unfortunately, it sounds bad, but that's a contempt of court, because the court's ruling was not to release their name, and Darren Hinch did. So you can get in trouble for that sort of stuff. Now, I'm just trying to have a look at and see if there's a whole report here on gutter journalism and how Today Tonight on Channel 7 can get in trouble for contempt of court. That means basically, again, they're going against the court's instructions not to report on something, even if it may be seen to be public interest. So sub judice is the idea to right to a fair trial. It's under a judge, and a contempt arises when a publication interferes with the course of justice, which is what I just explained to you about Darren Hinch and Channel 7, which means they've broadcast a story which is against the court's instructions. So there's 3 features of sub judice contempt. The defendant must be responsible for the publication. The publication must have a real and definite tendency to prejudice court proceedings. And this is a really important one. The issue must be pending. Okay, so it's still ongoing. The defense, so if you're trying to defend yourself against contempt of court, a fair and accurate report, and whether it's in the public interest or not. Now, as you can see, poor Darren Hinch, I do sympathise with him, because I personally wouldn't want someone that's charged with pedophilia living next door to me, so I'd like to know about it. That's just my personal opinion, but the court does try to protect these sort of things, and the reason they protect these is because there could be vigilante recourse against that person, which is against their civil liberties. Defamation defined. I apologise now that this is a little bit dry, but unfortunately this is how law is. So it's not as exciting as putting videos together and telling stories, but unfortunately we need to know this sort of stuff. So defamation is defined as material calculated to injure the reputation of another by exposing them to hatred, contempt, or ridicule. Or 2, it's a false statement about someone to their discredit. 3, a statement would tend to lower the person who is defamed in the estimation of right-thinking members of society generally. And 4, material that tends to make the person defamed be shunned and avoided by others. Okay. Examples of defamation. An imputation which may tend to cause a person to be hated or despised, or them to be treated with contempt by their peers. The publication of material that renders a person to ridicule, even if involving humour. So it's actually even some sort of satire. You need to justify yourself. The publication of a photograph that contained an optical illusion giving the appearance that someone was guilty of indecent exposure is also defamatory. And certain caricatures have been led to be defamatory. Determining what is defamatory is notoriously difficult in these matters, and the distinction between artistic freedom and defamation will no doubt remain the subject of litigation. And an example of that is the caricatures of Serena Williams, where they put on quite distinctive African American features that were used in previous racist propaganda from days gone by. So the plaintiff's case. There are 3 important elements for a defamation to occur. 1, the defamation must contain a defamatory imputation. So, secondly, the defamatory imputation can quite reasonably be interpreted as referring to the plaintiff. So, for an example, again, the picture of Serena Williams, there was no doubt it was her. She was in a tennis garb and a dummy spit, which she had, so it was clearly it was her. it is published to at least one other person or other than the plaintiff and the defendant. In other words, it's published to a third party. So it wasn't just between, say, the artist and Serena. It was actually put in the public domain, even if it was just sent to another person between other than the two of them. So what sort of defense can they have? That it's actually truthful in substance and contents. And then there's non-truth defenses. So for instance, is it public importance? So is the reporting fair? Is it honest opinion and fair comment? Is it qualified privilege or politically qualified privilege? And the qualified privilege and political qualified privilege is a little bit complex, and it usually happens in the political arena, and it's we're not going to go into that in the moment. The other thing, it's whether it's quite innocent or just trivial. So they're the other defences. So you can defend against producing some sort of media story, or in this instance, a caricature that I'm talking about. So who can sue? Any living person, including people who may appear to have bad reputations or poor reputations, or even a small business employing fewer than 10, non-profit organisations, as long as they're not trying to gain some sort of financial benefit from it. Big corporations are restricted from suing, but it doesn't prevent the actual executives of suing themselves as individuals. Groups can sue. A person can sue for defamation even if they're not named, and that's what I was saying before, that it can be there's some imputation that it could be you, or it doesn't directly have to say that it's you. So unfortunately, a dead person or their estates cannot sue, so it's fair game. The other thing we need to talk about is copyright. So copyright basically just tries to balance the interests of the users against the copyright owners against the interests of the copyright users. So whether it's your story and someone pinches it and tries to make a profit out of it. The thing about the copyright is really difficult because these days it just seems like everybody copies everybody's stories. But it's still illegal. That's the thing. If anyone wants to get up and challenge it, they can. So now you can find almost identical stories in many publications. And the way they can get around it is that there's a parent organisation, for instance, News Corp, that has many organisations under its banner that can share the stories. But there are plenty of people that actually just take stories and claim them as their own. And that is not a good thing to do, especially for you guys as journalists. You cannot pinch stories and pass them off as your own, even if you try to rewrite them. Okay, there's some information there on copyright. What about, can people copyright your ideas? Copyright does not protect ideas, opinions, information, or facts. Instead, it protects the way ideas, opinions, informations are expressed. Okay? So it doesn't protect just the idea, but more about how it's expressed. So if you have some sort of idea and you've written it down, just email it to yourself so there's a copy there. What about for journalists? Generally, for journalists and PR people who are employed by a news service or public relations organisation, the copyright for their work rests with their employer. So if you're working for someone, they own the copyright. So copyright puts journalists in a unique position. They can be a copyright owner as well as a copyright user. Okay, so the other thing too is you still own some intellectual property in the copyright, so as the author, but generally your organisation can still sell it off as their copyright, but you still always have the intellectual copyright. You're the copyright owner the whole way through. So fair dealing defences for journalists. So if you get into trouble, the defence of fair dealing for the purpose of criticism or review. So if you are putting out a story that's fair in the way you're providing some sort of criticism or review, that can be a good defence for you. The defence of fair dealing for the purpose of basically reporting news. Okay, so but as I've mentioned the whole way through, you just need to be really careful what you do, because even though there may be a defence for it, you can't be guaranteed that you can actually win the case with that sort of defence. So that's it for this lesson. I'm sorry it was a bit dry and a bit boring. And I didn't play the videos for you because it would just take up time, and trying to trudge through this quite complex media law stuff can distract you from actually doing the fun stuff like filming and editing and workshops. But I want you to have the law and ethics in mind. Just be careful how you report, what sort of privacy you're intending to have with the people you're reporting on. Respect their privacy. And just make sure that if you're going to write anything negative, just make sure that you're covering yourself, because it can end up quite messy. And keep your ethics in mind as well, okay? Just try to be an ethical journalist, and you should stay out of trouble. Okay, thank you.